everyone, welcome. My name is Mary Robinette Kowal, and I am here with my guest, Fonda Lee. We are going to be talking about her book, The Untethered Sky, or just, excuse me, Untethered Sky, which is phenomenal. So I have so many questions about this. In brief, what you're dealing with here is like falconry, but with rocks, like the giant birds from mythology. And this is such a beautiful character portrait. It's a beautiful portrait of obsession, I think, and also what it means to love someone that is wild. What made you go, this is a thing I want to write?
So this story has a long history. I came up with the idea for it many years ago, actually before I wrote the Greenbone Saga, who, for those of you who are familiar with my work, know is a really big chonker series. And I had come up with the idea for Untethered Sky even before I'd written that series. So probably like 2015, 2016, somewhere in
Oh,
there.
wow. Yeah.
It began because I was actually casting about for my next project. I had started working, I actually submitted a book. So I was waiting, I was one of those lull periods where you're waiting for
Mm-hmm.
edits and trying to cast about what's your next project going to be. And I remember a few different little things coming together. One was I had recently read this book, H is for Hawk by
Oh,
Helena.
okay.
It was
Yeah.
a memoir about a woman who is training a goshawk, and she's also dealing with grief. And it reminded me of how much I loved animal stories when I was young. So when I was a kid, I devoured books like Black Beauty and Julie of the Wolves and Where the Red Fern Grows and all those animal companion stories that make you cry at the end. So I thought, wow, gosh, I would love to tap back into that and do a story that features an human animal relationship in a strong way. But of course, being a fantasy author, it couldn't be that simple. So I had this inspiration of kind of the animal wildlife memoir and falconry combined together. And I said, why don't I do a story about rocks, the giant mythological birds of prey? Because they seem like an underdeveloped fantasy animal
Yeah.
compared to dragons. We see dragons everywhere, but we rarely see rocks. So I leaned into that and started outlining a story, and it was going to be a kind of coming of age novel, and I started working on it, and then things happened and the Greenbone Saga sold and it got shelved. And so I didn't really think about it that much for many years. And then in 2019 I was in the thick of writing Jade Legacy, which was the third book in my trilogy, and I was at Dublin Worldcon, and I sat down with Jonathan Strawn, who's an editor at Tor.com, and he said, have you ever thought of writing a novella? And at that point I was like, novellas are short. Short sounds fantastic. And
Right.
so I said, I'll get back to you about that. And I started thinking about what sort of story I could tackle in novella form. And that's when Untethered Sky, which at the time wasn't called Untethered Sky, it was just called The Rock. It came back out of the drawer, and I looked at it with fresh eyes. And I changed a lot as a writer in the intervening probably like 4 odd years, and reimagined it as a novella. And then it's all started to fall into place. So it ended up
Yeah.
being this short book that took a very long time to finally come to fruition.
So I've also done the thing where I've revisited something that I'd written quite some time ago. How much of the like you said that you had this idea for it originally. How far into process did you get with the original
The
idea?
original, I'd probably gotten about 6 chapters into a novel,
Hmm.
which for me is like maybe 20, 30,000 words.
Yeah,
And some of it still stayed. So the very first chapter of this
I
novella,
was wondering.
pretty much still the same. But
Okay.
the rest of it is very different. And like, the overall concept is still the same, but it's not it, it's not as simple for the writers that are listening to this. Reimagining a story into a different format, whether it's novella to novel or novel to novella or short story to novel, is oftentimes harder than just starting from scratch, because you're
Yeah.
picking the thing apart and then trying to figure out how it can fit, the pieces of it can be reimagined and then fit back together.
Is there anything from the novel that you're like, oh, I really wish I'd been able to fit that in, but it just didn't? From your concept of the novel, because I realize 6 chapters based on the length that you usually write is not actually that much.
That is true. I'm guilty as charged there.
No, it's not guilty. It's just reality.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking back to that original piece. And I think there was a lot more in terms of subplots with other characters.
Yeah.
This novella is a very tight story, and it's
Mhm.
very focused on the main character, Esther, and her relationship with her rock and with some of the other major players in her life. But it's entirely her story. And a novel has generally room for a lot more secondary characters and subplots. So that all just had to come out, which I
Yeah.
was actually fine with, because I think the heart of this story became stronger for it.
Yeah, because there are 7 characters. It's interesting because I'm thinking, like, I think there are 5 human characters, and then 2 of the rocks I feel like I understood as characters, but uh, Azra, the Red Angel,
Mhm.
felt more like someone who was, it felt more mythological
Mhm.
than everybody else. Like Zara, I was like, oh yeah, no, this totally. I know this bird, but in cat form. One of the questions from one of our listeners here in the audience is, how do you? And I think this is a great one. How do you clear the deck mentally to let go of your old expectations for a story of the shape that it of that old shape for the new re-envisioning of it?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and it can be challenging. I think the only answer I have, honestly, is time and distance. I think if you're
Hmm.
too close to the work, you're very tied to what it is in front of you right now. I
Yeah.
had the benefit that this book had been started but then shelved for many years. So I had a certain level of dispassion that you need to be able to go to a project and think about it in a completely different way. And
Yeah.
that there's some writers who've been through the process of adapting their work for screen or adapting it for comics or another medium. And I think they have to go through a similar process of stopping thinking of it as the thing that you created, and almost think of yourself as working with a piece of writing or a piece of property that's not yours. It's
Right.
this weird mental disconnect that you have to make. And yeah, like I felt like when I began writing this, I was in a different place in my writing career. My voice wasn't quite as refined yet. I hadn't really found my style yet. So it still felt
Mhm.
pretty raw, and it was early enough in its draft form that I didn't feel bad about really rethinking everything and starting from scratch.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm curious. Having said that, that first scene was also the first came out of the original, because I have some things that I've published that I actually wrote in high school and didn't publish until it was like 20 years later. And there are pieces of writing where I'm like, oh, this was, wow, that was actually not bad.
It's
And
weird.
other things where I'm like, what were
Uh-huh.
you even, did you, was were the revisions that you found yourself doing on that scene, were they to bring the voice into alignment, or to focus it in the direction that you were heading the new novella? Or I'm sure it was a
Yeah.
combination of both, but I guess what I think the actual question is, which piece of that was the heavier lift?
Hmm. I think it was more the former, the bringing the
Mm,
voice to alignment, because it's a strange thing to read something that you wrote many years ago,
yeah.
and it is your voice, but it's not your voice.
Yeah,
It's weird.
because you're not the same
I'm
person.
nodding because I'm sure you had that exact same experience where you're like, it sounds like me, but not quite me. And so a lot of the
Mhm.
revision is pulling out the part of the prose, basically creating the texture around it to make it more of who you are now.
Yeah, describing it as texture, I think, is a great way to think about it. Switching tacks a little bit, I happen to have recently done with writing excuses. We just did a workshop that was all horses and falconry, and so to handle raptors, it was an entirely different experience. It was like yes, and there was a lot of viscerality. Like when you talk about the smell of the mews, I'm like, oh yeah. So my question is, do you have falconry experience?
I don't personally. So it is a very demanding pastime that I can't fit
Yeah,
into my. However, I did do a ton of research. This is the beauty of being a writer is we get to do these things and call it book
yeah,
research. So I did visit a bunch of raptor centers. I went on hawk walks. I read a bunch of falconry manuals and was like looking for videos on how to train your falcon on YouTube. And so I did all the background work of trying to learn stuff as if I were about to try and take on falconry. And I was fortunate that I had a couple of beta readers who were master falconers. So I ran my manuscript,
ah,
and that was really helpful to make sure that I was capturing all of the details in a way that felt authentic.
yeah. Did you ever think about having her ride Zara?
So I have had readers mention this and
Hmm.
have they've there have been readers who've, but I wanted her to ride the bird and
I
was like,
love that she didn't. I
I know.
love that she didn't. It felt so much more real
Yeah, that
that
was
she
really
didn't.
my reason why was that I know there's going to people be like, it's a fantasy world, you can do whatever you want. But for me, I want my fantasy worlds to feel very grounded, to feel real. And the one of the main themes in this story is her fear of loss.
Yeah.
And Zara is such it fulfills a real part that's a wound in her. Like
Hmm.
feeling coping with loss that she's had, and she's constantly fearful of losing Zara. Having her ride the bird, first of all, just felt more romanticized to me.
Hmm.
As well as having her having to train this bird that could leave her felt more authentic to the story that I want to tell.
Yeah. No, I loved that. So the description of the dark days right at the beginning, where she's 5 days just talking to the bird, and the way that one of the things that you talked about was that it was one of the ways that you actually broke the do you in your head, is it rooker or rocker?
Rooker.
Rooker, that's good, that's the way it was in my head. But one of the ways you broke a rooker, the person who's handling the rock, was also by doing the dark days, which I
Right.
thought was just like such a wonderful detail. We've got a question in the audience about the world building. Was that taken from something about falconry, or was that very much
Yeah,
like,
it was taken from falconry methods of training the hawk to the hood. There's a whole process when you have a new bird of training it to take the hood and really basically isolating the bird so that
mhm,
you create the sense of dependency between the falconer, and the bird comes to like accept the hood and to see the falconer as a source of food and so on. So I extrapolated from that and thought about how much work that is for the falconer and how isolating it is for them as well to develop this bond with the bird,
yeah,
and went to the natural progression of that if you were training a bird that was monstrously sized and could eat you, and the sort of deliberate um, brainwashing that you'd have to do of both yourself and the animal in question.
yeah. Yeah, so I got to handle a an eagle owl, which is, for people who are not familiar, is the kind of one of the is the largest owl. And one of the things about them is that owl, which is 2 feet tall, like
Right,
it's big,
right,
but it's not a rock. It has a 500 pounds per inch grip strength.
right.
So when you were talking about the rock just punching through skulls, I was like, oh yeah, I have no zero zero problems believing that.
Yeah, yeah. Birds of prey in our own world are incredibly strong and terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. Can we talk about the manticores?
Sure.
So one of the things that I really love about this is that it feels so real. And what it actually felt to me was like This is how things actually went down. And now we have some legends about it that
Mhm.
people think are mythology, but really this stuff happened. With the manticores, I've encountered manticores in mythology before, but again, underutilized mythological creature. How much, again, in world building terms, how much did you think about the life cycle of a manticore?
I wanted them to feel very real. I wanted them to feel like animals. And manticores, like you said, they show up in mythology, but they are chimera creatures, right? They're often portrayed as having being this mix of animals. And
Yeah,
I wanted them to feel very much like actual natural predators of humans. And so I
yeah,
reverse engineered it to be like, okay, why would the manticore have these traits? So the manticore in mythology usually has the face of a human, but the body of a lion and the tail of a scorpion and all that. And so I reverse engineered it to be like, okay, they have this human ape-like face because it's terrifying to their natural prey, and
great.
have these quills because the rock is their only natural predator, so that helps protect them against strong talons. And so I reverse engineered the reasons why this animal would be the way it is, and then I wanted them to just be really scary, just to but in a natural world scary kind of way,
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah. Yeah, they really felt that way. It was, yeah, it was fantastic. And then the last kind of, this is probably not the last craft question I'm going to ask you, but a question that occurred to me when you were talking about that originally it was just called The Rock. Untethered Sky is such a good title. And titles are, I find, the hardest part of
they're so
writing.
hard.
They're terrible. Why are they so hard? Do you have a process for coming up with such a good title that you can tell me
No,
that I can take
no.
notes on?
So my actual process was to basically throw a whole bunch of words at the wall and spaghetti at the board fashion, and then get into a bunch of group chats and be like, okay, what do you guys think of this? And run through a whole bunch of lists of their terrible titles. I can't even remember them all now, but
Yeah.
probably like
Th-
dozens.
This, I'm very sad. That is very exactly the same as
Yeah.
my process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people listening, I have another writer in the room with me who's just like making very commiserating faces. And if you heard very quiet exactly in the background, yeah, titles are the worst.
Yeah. And then you
Um,
eventually throw them at your editor, and
yes.
who has some opinions and is no.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'm still a little disappointed that I didn't get Murder Bird, which was my personal
It worked so well for Murder Bot.
right?
Murder Bird. Yeah. We joke that my cat is murder. She just wants to, that's what she wants to do. Sweet, sweet cat, unless you are another cat or a rodent, and then murder cat. I did not have sweetness in her. Although I did love the description of her playing with the bucket.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is a real bird. This is absolutely a real bird. For those who are watching us right now on YouTube, I'm about to turn the camera off and go talk a little bit more with Fonda about all of the spoilers because there are a ton of really interesting details. If you want to catch that, you can go over to my Patreon, and as a member of the book club, you can get access to the recording of that and find out all the spoilers and why Fonda made certain choices that I had some very strong feelings about. Why, in fact, she made the choice that had me literally sobbing at the end of this book. Thank you so much for joining us, Fonda. You are fantastic.
Thank you.